So the only thing that really is happening is that we are consciousness from outside of that, outside of the demiurge, outside of the construct, plugging into the demiurge's kingdom of matter and energy and space and time. Its dream is what we are within. And if you yourself gather enough life force energy, etheric energy, astral energy to override the demiurge, then you can bend spoons, you can levitate, you can do superhuman things because you are overriding the laws of physics that it is holding in place.
Welcome back. I'm here again with Tom Montalk. Tom, welcome back.
Good to be back.
All right, so we left off on synchronicities, and we're going to talk about a number of topics. We'll work our way into kind of a fundamental model of reality. But let's get there by talking a little bit about what synchronicities are, what they mean, and generally any kind of views you have on them.
So Jung defined synchronicity as a meaningful coincidence. So it is something that is coincidence in the sense that there's nothing physical causing it. There's nothing physical making it happen. It just spontaneously happens. And yet, even though it seems like an accident, even though it seems like a coincidence, there's a meaning behind it that is a little bit too pointed. So it can't just be accident. It can't just be coincidence. It has to be arranged by something other than a physical mechanism. So in his case, he thought it was, okay, maybe it was a subconscious somehow influencing reality to send signs to the conscious mind while awake the same way that it does in dreams through dream symbols. So that already speaks to a connection between dreaming and waking. And what if reality is just a collective dream? And maybe we can get into that after this. So synchronicities, they can be numbers that you keep seeing, or an animal like the owl, for example, in your case, that you keep encountering. It could be that. It could be a particular person or color or item, some sort of theme that you see it not so often that it becomes, just probable, just ordinary. But every once in a while, it shows up in a way that is meaningfully timed. So it makes you notice, it's almost like, it's like in the Matrix movie, if you were in the Matrix and something from outside were trying to reach you. Like in Neo's case, he saw the white rabbit on the shoulder of this girl who knocked on his door, okay? So while he was just getting a message on his computer screen saying, follow the white rabbit. So there's a strange connection between two different physical things, but you can't figure out what the physical mechanism is that links them both together. So in my case, I've had so many synchronicities, and you've had many synchronicities, and a lot of people have had them. I've had them for decades. I've logged them. I've correlated them with the prior, during, and after circumstances to try to figure out if there was a connection. And throughout that time, I was able to narrow it down to, in my case at least, 6 or 7 different categories of synchronicities and what they possibly could mean, what their origin point might be. So if you'd like, I can just run through those 7 real quick, because
100%.
Yeah, I mean, they're useful to know about. So the first one that I noticed is what I call a precursor synchronicity. And that's where you experience something improbable. I mean, it could be nonsensical in its own self, like there's really nothing symbolic about it, but the timing of it precedes a time in your life when you're about to experience some major drama or disruption or a major decision point in your life where you can go this way or that way and has very big ramifications down the line. So it's almost like you're in the river of time and there's this period of turbulence or like a branching of the river going on. And prior to that, it's almost like when you hear the rumbling of the rapids coming up ahead of you, you start experiencing precursor signs of that. And one of those can be a spate of improbabilities that precede this time of improbable outcomes, okay? So that's precursor synchronicity.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Baen Books at Baen.com.
So the next one is a deviation synchronicity. And that's where you end up deviating off the most probable path into a highly improbable path of your own volition. Like maybe you normally always do this, maybe you always go for a walk in this direction, but today you decide to do something different just on a hunch, like an intuition. Some part of you that is not just your physical programming nudges you to do something different. So you do it. And because you're doing something improbable, another improbability then happens after that. Like maybe you're going for a walk and you see just a major synchronicity. Like, for example, my girlfriend and I, we decided to go for a walk on the spur of the moment. We normally wouldn't do this on this particular day. And I was looking down and I see some grass in a crack between the sidewalk that looks like a crab. So I'm like, whoa, that grass looks like a crab. That's kind of weird. So then I walk another 10 feet further, go around the corner, and there's a blue crab in the middle of the sidewalk, like literally 10 or 20 seconds after I said this little grass looks like a crab. And there's no way I could have seen the physical crab around the corner because, it was obscured from view. So things like that, it's an improbability that accompanies the improbability of us going on this walk in the first place, which, as I mentioned, we wouldn't have done for reasons I won't get into. So that's a deviation synchronicity. Another one is an expansion sync. And that's where you are in the process of spiritually growing, of understanding the universe more, contemplating, metaphysical ideas, even synchronicity itself. And because you're expanding like that, all of a sudden, it's almost like the universe mirrors it back to you by inducing more awe-inspiring, wonderful things that show the unity of reality. Okay. So that's another one. I mean, rainbows could be one, like 1111 could be one, things that are like positive that reflect your growth process.
Yeah. I constantly see 1111.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're pretty close. It's 11:10 where I am right now.
Okay. Interesting. almost nailed the timing. Yeah. Right.
Almost nailed it. Yeah. Within a minute.
Yeah. So, all right. So then there are just a couple more. So another one is a message synchronicity. And that's where something is literally trying to reach you to give you a message, either a positive one for encouragement or sometimes a warning synchronicity. Like it could be, I don't know what the cause is. It could be your own psyche, your own spirit, subconscious, higher self, or it could be like people who believe that our departed loved ones are on the other side watching us and trying to help us out. Maybe they could mentally send a sign to give us a heads up about something. So that's a message synchronicity. It could be numbers as well, or it could be some particular meaningful phrase. Like if your mom always had this particular phrase that she says to you and then she dies, and then one day, you get that same phrase during a critical time in your life.
To the audience.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So message synchronicity is another one is a manifestation synchronicity. And that's where your own self is causing
Let's stop right there. Let's acknowledge that though. You were literally talking about number synchronicities and at the exact moment you finished it, it was 11:11.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So that's run of the mill for me. That's like normal, unremarkable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, what I find interesting is certain people have a lot of synchronicities, and then there are certain people who never ever had a synchronicity in their life. I find that strange. I find that more strange than people who have them. Right. And the reason why I say that is because there are many people that debunk the idea of synchronicity, and you wouldn't debunk it unless you didn't have it yourself in your own life. And they might be 40, 50-year-old professors or whatever. They've known many things. They've had many experiences, and they haven't had that. And they haven't had a single paranormal experience that they would publicly acknowledge, at least. So that's an interesting thing to think about. Like, why is it that certain people have it and other people don't?
Why do you think that is? Do you think that's just closed-mindedness, or do you think they just haven't for whatever reason?
I think it's two possibilities. One is that is not their life track, their life path. They're here for just a much more narrow, parochial, physical 3D experience. And so none of this paranormal woo-woo stuff applies to them in their life. Okay, it's totally outside their sphere. And another possibility, which is very controversial, is that they're biological meat suits, that they don't have a higher spark of consciousness that reincarnates and has destiny and has karma and has higher forces looking out for them and manipulating their lives for whatever reason, and some people call them NPCs or background characters, and that gets into very controversial territory. But we have to consider that if we're talking about esoteric metaphysical ideas. We have to get into that as well. So I think it's one of those. Either it's not meant for them, or they had nothing really within them that can even appreciate these kinds of phenomena. I mean, just to be bluntly honest.
When you talk about NPCs, are you implying that there's no spark of life in them? They're just kind of simulations or simulacrums, or that they're just not as, it's like an evolutionary thing. They're just not as tuned in, or whatnot?
More, a little bit of both, but more the first. And the only reason why I say that is because if you study enough esoteric theory and the structure of the soul and what parts of our non-physical structure lead to different behaviors, you start realizing that what these people are missing in general is a higher spark that you would call spirit. So they might still have an energy field the same way that lower animals do or plants do. They still have life force energy. They still are biological. It's not like they're robots. It's just that they're missing the transcendent, permanent core of consciousness that reincarnates and builds upon itself through subsequent reincarnations. Something like that. According to theory, that's sort of what seems like might be the case in some of these people. Now, you could also have the case where, they're just normal people, but maybe they're just very spiritually asleep or not really interested in that topic. And that's very possible too. So on my website, I have an article called Spiritless Humans. And I go into extreme detail and nuance in there on the theory behind it, the behaviors associated with it, the rationale about why that might be, and all these other different esoteric sources going back even to the ancient Gnostics talking about this. So it's not like I'm coming up with this idea. This is an idea that's pervaded human culture for thousands of years.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to take you off course of the synchronicities, but continue down your path.
Yeah, so then besides the manifestation synchronicities where your subconscious wishes and desires are being fulfilled, you're drawing them into your life. You might be thinking something and then that same day it comes to you. Well, maybe it's not a synchronicity. Maybe you literally caused it. Like in the case of the raven where you intended for the raven to show up and hey, there it was, right? It could be like that. So that's one. And the last two is an opportunity synchronicity. And that's one where you just get this awesome serendipitous opportunity in your life, like a perfect job that you've been looking for, or a person that you meet that ends up being very instrumental to your awakening, to your friendship process, right? Something like that, where it's not just a symbolic thing, it's an actual strategic thing that is important for your life path. So you can have that. And then the last one, this is important. The last one is what I call an artificial synchronicity. And that is one where you think it's a sign from the universe, but it actually isn't. It's actually a manipulated thing that negative entities, or perhaps even humans, like telepathic humans could do, because what it involves telepathic nudging of different people to come your way to impress a certain idea upon you, like trying to get you to go down a certain path that intuitively is the wrong thing, but because multiple people are doing it and maybe you're getting weird signs, you think, oh, well, if the universe wants me to do it, then I will do it. I'll listen to the universe, to higher wisdom, even though it goes against my intuition and my warning bells are going off, right? So there are entities that can influence people's minds to say things to you, to recommend things for you, to encourage you to go down certain paths that might not be good for you. It could be a cult. It could be getting into some sort of a dangerous supplement that might harm you physically. So it's one way of taking you out that way, by tricking you into doing something unwise. So anytime you go against your discernment and your intuition, you got to be very careful, and you shouldn't allow spectacular, improbable things to persuade you to go down a path that is kind of suspicious. So those are artificial synchronicities, and people in this path of awakening that are involved in ufology or spirituality, esotericism, whatever, you become a target sometimes for these forces that are trying to steer you from the path of awakening by sending you false leads or people that put the pressure on you to believe a certain thing. But like I said, just trust your discernment, trust your intuition, and don't believe something as a sign from the universe just because it is improbable or just because it appears as a synchronicity. Just kind of like feel it out and think it through.
Okay. All right. Now, how does this tie to reality? The nature of reality?
Well, it's interesting because when you think about reality, if you just look around, if you look at, okay, well, what are we in? We see two aspects. Like on the surface, what we see physical objects with mass, momentum, energy. We see things that operate by mathematical rules and very strict constants, like the speed of light or the magnetic constant or electric permittivity or whatever. So these constants of the universe, they're almost like the constants in a computer program, which are set at the very beginning of it, and then the algorithms prefer it over and over again. So our reality, on the one hand, does operate very much like a rigid computer program with rigid rules, rigid physics, mathematics. I mean, when you add 1 + 1, you get 2. That's how this reality works. Whereas in a dream, you could add one apple to another apple, and you look back and it's actually 4 apples, because in a dream, it doesn't have that consistency, right? So reality has this consistent component to it, and that's what creates the illusion that we live in a real physical reality. But in truth, if you really think about it, in a dream, we also have a kind of physics, because you can open a door and it'll make a sound. You can shut it in a dream. You can knock on the wall. It feels solid until you question it and you try to put your hand through the wall. Then you can sink through it. But most of our dreams are actually operating by kind of pseudo physics, I guess you could say. And what that proves is that consciousness itself, just a pure conscious construct, can emulate physical reality. Now, if our subconscious were much stronger, much bigger, it could have way more persistence, way more consistency between the different things in the dream. And therefore, the physics of the dream might actually become so real that we couldn't distinguish it from actual reality. And so therefore, in waking reality, who's to say that what we think is physics, what we think is real matter and energy and atoms and so on, isn't actually just a thought construct within the greater field of universal consciousness that we are in? And that's actually what I think might be happening, that reality ultimately is consciousness, but consciousness itself, it's just like a blank template. And within that template, you can have more structured components, more fluid, open, free components. So you might have a section of it that is programmed or restricted down into operating in what we think is physical reality, when this is merely functioning or performing as if it were physical, but it's not actually physical on a fundamental level, right?
Well,
so
it's actually not physical, right? In the sense that 99.9% of everything is empty space, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're literally just quarks aggregated to electrons, aggregated to molecules, aggregated to DNA, or vibrating at each step, vibrating at a certain frequency. And it gives the illusion of solidity, but it's really not.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah, there's really no such thing as a particle, and therefore no such thing as matter. It's all energy, it's all vibration. And one way to understand that is with a hologram. So when people take a holographic photo of something and they record it on holographic paper, like photographic paper, you don't see the object on the paper itself. You just see like lines and wave patterns and little weird patterns. It's only when you shine a laser through it and the laser gets altered by these patterns that you then can see the three-dimensional object reconstructed. So in other words, reality itself might actually be like that holographic film where it's just patterns, energy patterns. And that's what quantum physics says. It says that everything is a wave function. It's a assemblage of probabilities and waves and energy patterns and so on. And when your consciousness, which is like the laser, shines through that, it reconstructs the illusion of an actual object, even though it was never there to begin with. So maybe that's what reality is.
Which implies that, kind of using holographic theory, implies that reality is a projection of some greater consciousness.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So my personal theory, based on mythology and personal experience, is that reality is a field of consciousness, and that part of it has been structured into this physical illusion that we're in. However, in order to restrict just universal free consciousness into this restricted state, you need something that occultists would call a thought form, or a tulpa, okay? Which is a thought...
You are hitting a lot of things right now, but keep going.
No, this is important stuff. This is like the fundamental reality stuff, right? So in order to have this thought construct, you need it's almost like a programmed thought. Okay, a thought construct. And that's what the ancients would call the demiurge. So the demiurge, according to the Greeks and the Gnostics, was essentially the soul of the universe. It was the energy field of the universe that fashions and sustains matter as we know it. So when we look around and we see physical reality, we are essentially within the grip of a universal thought form or a universal tulpa made of etheric and astral energies that is programmed in such a way that it enforces the illusion of matter within our consciousness, including our physical body. So when we talk about the physical brain and our eyes and all that, even this is part of the illusion. So the only thing that really is happening is that we are consciousness from outside of that, outside of the demiurge, outside of the construct, plugging into the demiurge's kingdom of matter and energy and space and time. Its dream is what we are within. And if you yourself gather enough life force energy, etheric energy, astral energy to override the demiurge, then you can bend spoons, you can levitate, you can do superhuman things because you are overriding the laws of physics that it is holding in place. So that's sort of the theory, you know. You can't just say that, oh, everything is consciousness, because then people say, well, if everything is consciousness, then how come I can't move objects with my mind? You know, I'm conscious and this is all consciousness, so how come I can't do that? Well, it's because you are getting resistance from the universal soul or the universal subconscious, just like in your dreams. When in a dream you encounter a wall, at first it might feel solid. Well, it's a part of your own subconscious that is doing that. Same thing in waking reality. You might have a demiurge, a universal subconscious that is holding reality in place. And because it is more powerful than your own subconscious, there are things that you can't do in waking reality that you can do in dreams, unless you also proportionally grow your consciousness and your etheric and energy and life force powers and everything to override this universal thought form or universal tulpa that is holding physical reality in place.
Now, this demiurge, and correct me if I'm wrong, but within Gnosticism, I think the view is that the demiurge is not, and again, this gets into a little, has religious connotations, so I'm not trying to go there, but I'm just explaining how it may have been conceived way back when. I believe the understanding is that there's an ultimate God, but the demiurge is not the ultimate God. It's kind of like a crippled God, like a corrupted God, or like a simulacrum of the true God or source, whatever your religious tradition says. Is that an accurate assessment of that? Or I'm sure I'm missing, sure theological scholars or theologians would start making dozens of mistakes, but
well, right. So
roughly, is that about right?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. So Plato, the philosopher Plato, he believed that the demiurge was what fashions reality and that it is fundamentally good, if not neutral. Okay, it is just it's like the GPU in your computer rendering a video game. It's a neutral piece of hardware that's necessary for projecting the game environment. Okay, but then centuries later, the Gnostics said no, the demiurge is evil. And this world is evil. Like, it created this world as a trap for the soul. So you've got these opposing viewpoints. Like, what is a demiurge, good and neutral and necessary, or is it evil? And the solution that I hit upon is that it's actually both, in the sense that the demiurge in itself, fundamentally and originally, is a good and neutral thing. Like, well, not even just a GPU, but the rendering system for your operating system on your computer, your whole entire desktop and all your files and everything. That is what the demiurge is. And then you can have a part of that gets corrupted, like malware, like Trojan, like a corrupted part of your partition of your hard drive or something, where that part now has infected files and it's dangerous. And perhaps the computer has to go into safe mode to keep the rest of the system from getting infected. Okay, maybe that's what our reality is. Maybe our reality is a portion of this demiurgic realm that has become corrupted. Maybe a portion of the demiurge itself that has gotten corrupted and presides over this place. And now we are quarantined or isolated off from the rest of creation because there's something wrong here that needs to be resolved before we can merge back into the greater creation. Maybe that's why Earth seems to be under a certain kind of quarantine, and why aliens cannot be out in the open and everything has to be kind of hush-hush and covert is because we're existing within this bubble that's sort of isolated from the rest of creation itself. I mean, this is like getting into really abstract, speculative territory, but I've written a lot of articles, and even my Gnosis book, which you can get on Amazon, my Gnosis book gets into this quite a bit about how that could have all come about and the theory behind it. So, I mean, there's a lot to this idea, you know?
So, okay, continue with kind of this view of reality where you have essentially like a GPU that's rendering the reality, but there's a way for, in the collective subconscious, let's call it, or collective unconscious, I don't know what the exact verbiage is, but there are ways to circumvent that in terms of manifesting very real behaviors. There have been accounts of people who are actually able to levitate.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
How does one circumvent this reality?
So to understand that, you do have to understand what's under the hood of reality. So you can think of it this way. So imagine you might have heard about the afterlife or the astral realms. It's where astral projectors go. It's where some people think dreams take place. And it's also where people go after they die, after they exit their body and, maybe either before the light or after the tunnel of light, they enter into this astral realm where everything is more fluid. It's more like a dream, kind of like a shared dream state between different beings. Okay. It's where the rules are really loose. It's more like a realm of consciousness. So if you're in that realm, you're in this astral energy field. Imagine if you were powerful enough to create a tulpa or thought form or construct within that, which can create a part of the astral that is locked down according to mathematical rules, almost like a computer program. And so anything that enters into that will be still within the astral, but everything will function as if it's locked down, as if it were physical reality. And maybe, just maybe, that's what physical reality is. So maybe we are actually in an astral energy field that has had a part of it locked down, programmed into what occultists would call the etheric energy field and physical matter itself. So imagine if that were the case. So here we are, what we think is physical reality with these physical bodies. And in order to overcome this lock, this programmed mathematical rigid physics and reality and matter and energy and space and time, what we have to do then is we have to accumulate enough energy, etheric energy, astral energy, as I said before, to override the other lock caused here by the demiurge or by this thought form or tulpa that is otherwise restricting a very free and fluid astral state. So earlier when I mentioned how a lot of our reality does seem to be programmed mathematical, with constants and algorithms and laws of physics. Well, that's not all that reality is, because we also have synchronicity. We also have manifestations and miracles, improbabilities, signs sent to us from outside of this construct. So there's definitely an aspect to our experience, to this reality, that is not within the realm of physics, within the realm of mathematics and rules and so on. They're like cracks in the facade. They show that we are within an illusion, because you can't explain those things from the viewpoint of physics. But you can explain physics from the viewpoint of it being a field of consciousness, which is exactly what quantum physics says, if you go by the idea that you need a conscious observer to manifest reality as we perceive it to be. So what that means is that reality does have two sides of it. It has the physics program side, the simulation side, and it has the symbolic, meaningful, spiritual, miraculous, paranormal experiences, which is the more symbolic, numinous, consciousness, sentience-based side to reality, which is what reality, I think, ultimately really truly is. It's just that part of it has been locked down into a mathematical construct that we are existing within, which, we could call it a simulation, but it's not a simulation being simulated on hardware, like digital electron hardware, like 1,000 years in the future. I don't think it's that. I think it's that we are being, quote unquote, simulated via a thought form, via a tulpa, a thought construct that has been programmed to be very precise and mathematical and rigid, geometrical in its operation. So that's what I think is going on.
So egregore, thought form, tulpa, right? This concept goes by a variety of names, whatever you want to call it. How ubiquitous are these things? Is it something that's very rare? And then not only are you, or is it something that's relatively commonplace? And then how are they created or manifested? So is it the collective unconscious kind of spawns these things into being? Are they created very intentionally and with a tremendous amount of energy? Or is it a mixture of both? So for instance, might a soccer team or European football team have an egregore that spontaneously emerges from the collective energy of the fans that support it? Could a YouTube channel with its followers and subscribers have a thought form that spawns into existence because of the collective energies of the followers and subscribers over time? How does this all work? So those two kind of questions. How is it spawned, and how ubiquitous is it?
Yeah, well, it's my understanding that just like fish are surrounded by water and sponges and jellyfish, we, as a fish, are surrounded by an etheric and astral energy field in which there are many constructs that are in it, that are surrounding us constantly, that are generated by other beings, generated by higher beings, like godlike intelligences, but also generated by us ourselves. So anytime you have a very focused thought, an imagined thought, like a daydream fantasy or something that you're putting both visual and emotional energy into, it spawns a thought form out of you. Okay. And the more often you repeat it, the more you feed this thought form or tulpa, and the stronger it grows until eventually it can gain a certain level of autonomy. It becomes like an etheric / astral automaton that has its own seeming volition, even though it's more of an AI construct in a way. Okay. And its mission is to do what you intended it to do and to feed upon the energy that gave rise to it in the first place. So you can imagine if someone has very dark, depressive thoughts, okay, and they stew in it every single day, they're creating one or more thought forms that have the energy of depression and sadness in them. And then this thought form, for its own existence, its own survival, will want to feed off that same energy. So it'll actually start influencing your mind, your thoughts, to become even more depressed more often. And you can see how there's a feedback between that. And it can be depression, it can be hate, it can be anger, it can be people that are extremely heavily into pornography, and and go on and so on and so forth. Anything that combines visual with emotional tends to generate these thought forms. So as you mentioned, sporting games, sporting events, all the teams, they're putting so much hope and energy and wishes into it that, yeah, they're generating mass thought forms that essentially battle each other, figuratively speaking, on an occult astral level. Now, if you were clairvoyant, you could definitely see these things arising and probably intermingling and trying to, swallow each other. And actually, there was a movie called Branded, which is exactly about this theme, where it's a strange movie, but it's interesting, where corporations, their branding, their logos, the whole culture behind it, they generate these egregores or tulpas that end up battling each other. So the movie depicts these things fighting each other, just as we're talking about now. So it's an interesting movie because it depicts.
When did this movie come out?
I'm guessing early 2010s, maybe at some point. Branded. It's called Branded.
Is it like a serious movie? Is it a comedy? Like, what's the genre?
I would say it's a social satire. So it's not comedy, but it's a satirical take on reality. It seems like, I think it was made by a pair of brothers, and I think they combined their marketing knowledge, their occult knowledge, into just a script. They kind of like dumped it all in there just to put it out there to the world. So that's why it's a weird movie. But if you want to see a depiction of these tulpas and egregores, check that one out.
Now, what about combining tulpas and egregores?
I think if the energies are compatible, if they're compatible within us, then they would be compatible externally. So you might have a feeling of depression combined with anger and resentment against something, the woman that betrayed you, society for not giving you your hopes and your dreams, right? So you can have depression and anger combining themselves within you. So therefore, externally within the tulpa, you might also have these energies combining, or maybe two separate tulpas, one for anger, one for resentment, depression and resentment combining and joining forces. So even in occult theory, there's the idea that there are different types or levels of darkness, and they can sometimes collaborate. So you might have one kind of darkness which is purely oriented towards the destruction of the individual, another one oriented towards deluding, taking an individual and pushing them into false illumination, false enlightenment, and then another one that's oriented towards trapping people within matter, like the whole transhumanist materialism paradigm, the non-spiritual paradigm. So those are all different examples of evil, right? And they can join forces and, propagate their agendas accordingly. Now, when I talk about different types of evil, I'm talking about it from an archetypal level. And archetypes, they can manifest at different levels of the illusion, whether it's alien forces or occult forces or such psychological forces within us or cultural forces. These things manifest at different levels because reality is fractal. So there's different levels of self-similarity across different levels of scale or ontological levels of being. So, yeah.
Okay, in terms of, you said a lot of things there. And, if you're using this tulpa theory, it feels like there's, like right now, I'm just going to give you a random piece of news. Apparently, there's a police chief in the UK threatening to extradite Americans for violating their batshit insane speech laws. I'm actually tempted to say something that would violate it just to dare him to come after me. But this feels like one of those there's this persistent, diabolical effort to just censor everything. And everything that they censor, or not everything, but many of the things they censor turn out to be true. And I'm just going to give a black and white example. I can't use certain words because, this very platform, YouTube, will censor me for them. So during the pandemic, there was a theory on the origin of the malady, and that theory was the lab leak theory. Anybody who spoke about it out loud had YouTube channels banned, kicked off, etc. But a year or so later, the Federal Bureau of Investigation put out an intelligence assessment and said that was the most likely theory. So there's something pervasive going on that's, diabolical evil. You're seeing it manifest in the UK. For instance, an immigrant rapes a little girl, he gets a few days in jail. Meanwhile, or he gets, community, I can't remember the exact crime, but whatever it was, it paled into comparison to what people got penalties for saying things that were anti-Islamic, right? So what that's ended up doing is it's stirring up an incredible wave of resentment among people who generally follow the law and are law-abiding citizens, but now they can no longer trust the institutions that they used to be able to trust. And it's kind of propelling society toward a breaking point of self-protection, right? Like people are going to start to protect themselves because they don't trust these institutions. And these institutions, frankly, don't deserve to be trusted. So is that kind of some pervasive egregore or amalgamation of egregores?
Yeah, well, it's a complex and nuanced question because, the best way that I can put it is I think that egregores, tulpas, thought forms, they are part of that feedback process, but they might not be the primary instigators of it. Okay, I think there are sentient beings with very dark agendas, both human and non-human. And by non-human, I mean both alien and essentially demonic forces that are all colluding to push this world to instability and chaos, essentially turning this world into a hell realm. I think that's what they're going for. They're trying to bring hell from the lower astral planes here into the physical, or what we think is the physical, in order to just expand suffering, and to therefore, that ties into the whole energy farm, Loosh energy feeding theory, that they're trying to expand their operation by turning Earth into a more productive producer of energy through the suffering and degradation of the human spirit. That seems to be what the overriding agenda is. Now, the agenda itself has many parts. You've got the political level, the military, geopolitical, what I talk about elsewhere about the deep state versus the dark state. That's part of that agenda as well. Okay, it ties into that. But ultimately, you can, so this gets into a sort of a metaphysical, spiritual idea, which is that the dark things that happen to us individually in this life, they are gambles for the dark forces, because if we stick true to our principles and our discernment and use the tools that we have, our spiritual, intellectual, wisdom, experiential tools, if we make it through that, then they lose and we become stronger and wiser because of it. So they shoot themselves in the foot by sending us these challenges in life, because if we go through it, we learn from it. And like in my case, like a lot of my website comes from personal experiences dealing with negative forces, where because I made it through, I learned from it and I'm able to share the tactics and the techniques that I use to get through it with others. And therefore they then might be able to not succumb to the same, tragic outcomes that I could have if I didn't apply myself, right? So what I'm trying to say is there's a silver lining to dark things sometimes, dark things. And that even includes what we're talking about here with the UK situation, for example, or the last pandemic or future pandemics to come. And that these are opportunities for us to exert the best within us and to fight for truth, for justice, and to oppose darkness and deception and manipulation wherever we see it, right? It sharpens us to do that. And maybe, and a lot of times we might win, and it might actually swing back the other way, where historically we can look back upon this time and say, we will never let that happen again. We might triumph out of this, and we might actually be immunized by this to ensure that we have a more just, a more resilient future against these types of infiltrations and corruptions and de-evolutions of segments of our population.
Now, if thought forms are real, and this channel were to have something that fueled that thought form, it would be truth. Truth in all its beauty and ugliness, but truth. There are many motivations behind this channel, but that is by far the biggest. I'm just trying to understand and help my audience go through the same journey I am in understanding the nature of reality. And which is why I don't have a dogmatic approach. I'm not a nuts and bolts guy, right? But I won't come out and say it's definitely not all nuts and bolts. I don't know. there's so much disinformation and misinformation out there that it's hard to tell the truth. The best tag to kind of know what is disinformation is to watch what the media is pumping out. And there's probably a 60 to 75% chance that what you're hearing is disinformation. Now, this particular platform would say the opposite because they're also being influenced by whatever the powers that be are. Now, you mentioned deep state versus dark state. For folks who aren't familiar with this concept, can you elaborate on it?
So the deep state is what people would know as the unelected bureaucracy, all the unelected officials, the military contractors, the non-governmental organizations and think tanks that manipulate governmental policy without the consent of the people, without them ever having been elected. Okay, so it's this like shadow layer that is underneath the main surface. And even though the government on the surface changes over through elections, this deeper layer is always there, ready to manipulate the next people that come into power. And they operate essentially like a criminal cartel or syndicate. You know, they scratch each other's backs. They hold each other in check through mutual blackmail rings. That's how they kind of keep themselves from spilling the beans. So it's a very corrupt layer. However,
so kind of like a Jeffrey Epstein / Puff Daddy, right?
Yeah.
Like Sean Puffy.
Right. Yeah. And all those guys and women too, it's very well known that they have ties to government, military, intelligence agencies, whether it's US or Israel or elsewhere, okay? Five Eyes nations and others. They have ties with those because that's where a lot of the deep state corruption originates. It originates within centers of power because power tends to corrupt and attracts people that are sociopaths and psychopaths who use that power to do nefarious things. And it's a very highly intelligent and coordinated level of evil that happens there because, I mean, they're using the powers of national security instruments and apparati to...
Now, to be fair, I wouldn't say it's all evil. I would say
true.
If you let politicians act the way politicians do, we would be in a far worse state than, because most of them, I'm just being blunt, are stupid. Most of them are, the process by which we select them involves an immense amount of narcissism, right? So they're either the malignant narcissists or psychopaths, sociopaths, but they're not very smart, which compounds the issues that they may cause. So part of this so-called deep state, permanent bureaucracy, actually also acts as a curb on those behaviors. But like any amalgamation of organizations, there's a dark element and there are light elements to it.
Yeah,
opinion, but
yeah. It kind of depends on semantics, because some people define the deep state only as the corrupt element of that, whereas others define it as the entire unelected bureaucracy, which if you define it that generally, then of course there's going to be patriots, there's going to be good people in it, putting out fires that we don't even know about, right? So they're involved in that level, right? So, but the important thing to understand is that even those people, they're not at the top of the food chain. There's a level deeper beneath that, which I call the dark state. And the dark state, that's what has to do with what I mentioned earlier, the deep underground military bases, off-world stuff, things that tie back to the Manhattan Project, the Philadelphia experiment, Nikola Tesla stuff, because Nikola Tesla, after he died, a lot of his papers were given to Donald Trump's uncle, John Trump. And John Trump, his expertise was in high voltage electricity and radar invisibility. And those two things were what were used in the Philadelphia experiment to essentially teleport a naval ship through space and time, doing some very crazy stuff with that. So the whole like black ops stuff, that is what ends up leading to the deeper, darker elements of the military industrial complex, where they are what Richard Dolan would call a breakaway civilization, because they've been at it for so long that their culture has branched off from our culture to where they're probably at this point closer to the mindset of alien type civilizations than they are to human type civilizations. And because they're the ones that are the deepest, the furthest in the background, and they're also the most intelligent and have the greatest level of technology, they have the ability to use the deep state itself as puppets, controlling the surface level puppets, which are our elected bureaucrats, right? So it's like puppets controlling puppets controlling puppets. But as you mentioned, not all of it's bad. So just as the general broad sense deep state might have its patriots and good people in it, I do believe that the dark state, or the dark state, might also have what we would call relatively benevolent forces in it. And so therefore, we are actually witnessing probably competition, if not wars, between these levels, between deep state elements, because on the surface, we see like, oh, conservatives versus liberals, but that's like major surface. Beneath that, you've got deep state factions, and then beneath that, you've got dark state factions, and then beneath that, that's when you get to the alien, ultra terrestrial, and even like occult, demonic versus angelic spiritual agendas, right? So it's like a Russian doll where you've got layers within layers within layers, but there is a dualism or polarity to it. And so therefore, what we see in the news, that's like just the end effect of all of that.
Yeah, I think the way that I evaluate anybody, regardless of political party, is, do their policies contribute to the destruction of free will and human autonomy, or do they free up human capacity and intellectual capital and creativity and free thought? And that's what it's about. So if it's pervasive censorship, there's no other word for that than evil. If it's about, and look, even poisonous ideas deserve to be surfaced, because how will you know that they exist, and how will you challenge them, and how can you defeat them if you know that they're boiling underneath the surface? And that's what persistent censorship does. These ideas don't go away. They go underground, they metastasize. And I don't understand. Same thing with digital currency, right? Imagine if we go to a world where we have one currency that tracks everything you buy, and they decide you've had too much steak this week. You can't. So anything that increases the levers of individual control of the human spirit, that is freedom destroying destruction, is evil. There's no other, but there are people in the world right now who are behaving like it's totally fine.
Yeah.
Our betters know. And when I look at the people who run things, I am beside myself how incompetent and what lack of insight they have. And it always operates with, you get less, I get more.
Right.
And it is completely unsustainable. So,
right.
So where are we in this conflict? So there's a book, I can't remember the name of the book, but it talks about the 4 turnings in a generational cycle. And right now we're in what they call the 4th turning, which is when everything unravels.
Yeah.
Right? The destruction of the current system. And we seem to be right on target right now. I think, and again, I'm just going to be objective here. In January, when whoever is elected president comes to be, there are public officials like Jamie Raskin, for instance, let's say Trump wins, who are publicly saying out loud that even if he wins, they're going to go to the 14th Amendment, Section 3, and claim that he can't be president because of the, this January 6th insurrection, whatever, which he's never, has never been charged with or proven. That would be that would be the unraveling of the republic. In the same vein, on the other hand, if a relatively unpopular person until recently, now she's suddenly leading in the polls, at least the Economist poll that I saw this morning has her 2 points ahead. But until a few weeks ago, both sides would have said she was the polls said she was wildly unpopular. But now she's suddenly ahead in the polls. Whether or not you believe them, that's a separate thing. If she wins, nobody on the right will believe it. And it'll also lead to generalized instability. And same with if Trump wins, I think no one on the left will accept it for the reasons I talked about earlier. So I think hopefully that crisis, because there will be a crisis, will be moderate and calmer heads will prevail. But we seem to be headed for even more tumultuous times. Where does this play out with kind of the 4th turning, as well as this deep state versus or deep state, dark state construct that you've come up with?
Yeah, well, I mean, we are on the precipice of many kinds of turnings, not just the fourth turning per that book. I know which book you're talking about, but also other cycles, even in Hinduism within the Yuga cycles, or for example, in astrology between the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius, we're moving into the age of Aquarius. And if you look at what all the traits are of Aquarius, like on the positive side, you've got humanitarianism, networking, spirituality, technology for greater positive purposes. And then on the negative side, you've got, let's say, controlling, totalitarianism, hive mind. We see both of those dynamics happening right now culturally. And the reason why that matters is because when we talk about, let's say, the elections coming up. Well, the election, that is politics. However, it is a consequence of culture, and the splitting, the polarization is happening culturally. So when we talk about calmer heads prevailing, that assumes it stays at the level of politics where people can just shake hands and work it out and agree. But the division is deeper than that. The division is cultural. And not only that, but the division is existential. Because it's reality and an alternate reality manufactured by propaganda, okay, and disinformation, an alternate reality that is in competition irreconcilably with real reality and the people that subscribe to the truth, real reality. And there is no reconciliation in a normal conventional way. So if you want to ask me what would be the best outcome would be a Trump win, okay? And you said, well, in that case, the leftists would riot and it would cause a lot of instability. But here's the thing.
And I'm not, again, be clear, I'm not endorsing either side. I'm not keeping this political. You're just looking at it, and you're not endorsing either side either, I'm guessing. You're just looking at
socio-political forces and cultural forces. That's what I'm looking at.
Right. Yeah. I'm just trying to protect both of us, buddy.
Of course. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Now here's the reason why I say that, okay? If you have a population that is divided exactly 50-50, that is the maximum probability of civil war and irreconcilability and maximum damage as they try to, go after each other. If you have it more, let's say like 20-80 or 70-30, well, in that case, usually the majority prevails and they're able to vanquish the other side and therefore implement an order that promotes unity through force or some sort of, or maybe the legal system or whatever, okay? Now, in this case, if it is 70-30 versus, one or the other, no matter which side it is, it's going to result either in well, to be frank, both possibilities will result in some increase in authoritarianism. There's no doubt about it. Why? Because it will lead to instability, which will require a greater governmental authoritarian response. So authoritarianism is coming due to the lack of peace, the lack of homogeneity in the culture. Right.
Either way. I agree with that. Yeah, right. I agree with that.
Right. It's just, but see, here's where the difference comes in. It's my personal belief that the media is lying about the popularity of Harris, essentially. I think they're making something up. That's my personal belief, okay?
No, I think statistically, you don't have a switch like that in that quick time, especially if there's been no debates, there's been no data to change the views of people. But I don't think that's controversial. I think that's pretty... Some people might find it controversial, but
Right. So,
I mean, the same media a few weeks ago said she was, anybody who said she was the border czar was lying. Right. And I mean, the president clearly appointed her as border czar. Like that's, again, not taking a side. That's just a black and white, lie. That's just a bold-faced lie. But
and same thing with like Biden, for example. I mean, it was barely even a couple months ago that they said that he was sharp as a tack. He was awesome. Like mentally, he was just so clear. He was so good. He was the best candidate. And then within a week, they switched to the other 180 degrees.
Yeah, and then there's the other thing that felt like a soft coup to me. I felt bad for the man, actually. But anyway, just keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. So my point is, if the media is lying about how popular she is and how popular that side of politics is, then instead of it being 50-50 like they're trying to portray it, it might actually be 70-30, okay? 70 on the side of, let's say, the more conservative, populist side of it, okay? If that is the case, then for the sake of avoiding civil war, it is imperative that the 70% is the one that becomes, that runs the next administration. And the reason why I say that is because you need the will of the people, you need the will of the majority in order to implement government policies that can increase unity through some sort of I mean, I don't want to say like physical force, but at least some sort of incentive to unify. Okay. So if it is 70-30, then the 70 is the one that has to be it in order to prevent civil war. Because if it's the other way around and you've got a government run by the 30%, that is maximum civil war potential. That will lead to the unraveling of America as we know it. So I hope it doesn't end up being that way. It has to be the other way just for the sake of peace and so on. Now, one thing I want to mention about that is just tying it back to the idea of thought forms and egregores. You mentioned earlier how the thought form of truth is essential. So that's something that on this channel you were promoting, right? The reason why I bring that up is because the whole idea of thought forms can be used in an activist fashion to support more probable positive futures. And the way that you do that is not only by contributing to it through physical action or through words like we're doing in this podcast that you're doing on your channel, but also just through where we put our daily focus, you know. So for example, if most of your day you spend it on thinking about resentments and angers, whether it's for society as a whole, right? That's the thought form that you're contributing to. Now, you can do that as long as you make up for it through physical action that gets rid of the problem, right? So I'm not saying like don't ever think negative. I'm just saying if you do think negative, make it worth it. Make it worth it so that you take action to solve the issue. I mean, that's what negative emotions are there for. It's to alert you to a problem. You know, just like pain from a cut, it gets you to like look at the problem and to therefore put a Band-Aid on it or something, right? So negative emotions, they serve their purpose, but they don't serve it if you only focus on them without ever addressing the problem. So that aside, I do think that if you remember what your values are, truth, justice, righteousness, integrity, you know, unity amongst fellow spiritual brethren, okay? If you focus on that and you make that your thought form and you contribute to it, that thought form is going to reinforce more of those same experiences and thoughts and feelings that contributed to it. So for example, if you focus on the idea of awe and wonder and mystery, and you create a thought form that way, just by thinking about those, you're going to start attracting events and experiences that induce more awe, wonder, and mystery, which could be interesting books, people, information that you need to kind of break out of the matrix, break out of your limited thinking, and expand your thinking into these more awe-inspiring realms. So if you combine that with, let's say, truth, justice, righteousness, all these positive emotions, and you feed into that, you're essentially creating a soliton or like a self-reinforcing feedback loop for yourself to enhance whatever probable future it is that you're aiming towards via those emotions, via those thoughts and those feelings. So, you know, as much as we need to be aware of the negative forces, negative political threats and forces and deal with that on a physical action basis, we always have to keep our mind, our heart, our soul oriented towards our North Star, our spiritual North Star, and never lose sight of that, because that is the magnetic attraction that we need to give us a leg up on the situation above and beyond just physical action.
Any final words for the audience about the nature of reality?
Well, I think that's pretty much it. I think if you consider the fact that we are dual beings, that not only do we have a darker side to us and our true, authentic, genuine, spiritual, positive side to us, we also have a higher component and a lower component. And we are a microcosm of greater reality, right? So greater reality also has its light, its dark. It also has its lower matter component and its higher spiritual components. So if you just imagine the universe in that way, then you can start to understand the dynamics and how, just as we have battles within ourselves, between different parts of ourselves, there are battles externally at all different levels of scale between darkness and light. And ultimately, it is up to us and our free will to choose which one to align with, both externally and internally, and to therefore contribute to via our actions, our thoughts, our feelings, and just what we throw our being into.
Thank you, Tom. It was an absolute pleasure, and I will definitely have to have you back on at some point in the future.
Yeah, sure thing, Sean. It was great being here.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and you can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates program. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of a expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's two options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much and keep watching. I really appreciate it.